Welcome to Lesson 3 in Unit 1. This is all about plucking strings with our right hand. So we're going to talk about a couple things. First thing is basic hand position. We want to keep our wrist neutral. We don't want to do a lot of this and we don't want to do a lot of this. We want to just keep it pretty neutral. This part of our hand will be pretty close to the strings. We don't want to get our wrist too high up. We want to keep, again, a fairly neutral wrist across the back. Our thumb will tend to sit this way on the neck, forward of the fingers, which will be tucked under. And people don't like this because as beginners, you really are going to want to look at your fingers. And we're going to try to avoid that. So this is the basic hand position. My thumb is pretty much, the knuckle is not bent, it's flat. My fingers are very bent as if I'm holding on to a bicycle handlebar is the best description I can give you. That's the basic hand position. Our thumb will always pluck down, which I'm talking about toward the floor. It's actually going toward a higher string. This is where it can be very confusing for people. And then our fingers will pick up. And again, I'm speaking directionally, not pitch-wise. There are a couple basic concepts about picking the string. So let's talk about what happens before we pluck the string. Before we pluck the string, we have two options. One is to have our fingers clear of the string and reach in and pluck it. The other is to actually rest our fingers on the string prior to picking it. And that's what I want to talk about now. That idea is called planting. So when we plant, we rest our fingers on the strings that we're going to pick so that we're ready to then pick them. So right now I've planted my thumb on the 5th string. My index finger is planted on the 3rd string. My middle finger is planted on the 2nd string, and my ring finger is planted on the 1st string. Once we're planted, we have two options for how we pick the string. The first option is called a free stroke. And so I'm going to take my thumb and I'm going to pick this 5th string. So I'm using a downstroke. And when I'm done picking the string, my thumb is free and clear of all strings. That's called a free stroke. So this is a planted free stroke. If I don't plant prior to it, it would just look like this. I'd reach in, pick it. But for beginners, I really encourage you to plant first because that will help get your hand positioned together. So plant, free stroke. This would be a great thing for you to do. Just plant, free stroke. If I was doing it with my index finger, what I'm going to do is keep all my other fingers planted and just plant, free stroke. Plant, free stroke. If I want to use my middle finger, I would recommend removing your index finger from the planted position so that your middle finger is not encumbered by that planted. And then finally, if I'm going to use my ring finger, I would free up these two string fingers. But notice they're as if they're planted. You probably can't even tell if they're planted or not. And those are all free strokes when I come free of the string after I pick it. And this would be a great exercise to just set your fingers and leave your thumb planted and then pick with your index finger. Then you can pick with your index and middle, planting beforehand, and then all three, and then plant. Now the other type of stroke is a rest stroke. And when we play a rest stroke, again, we're talking about what happens after we pick the string. Our fingers or thumb are going to rest on the adjacent string after we pick. So for example, if I'm picking this 5th string again with my thumb and I'm using a rest stroke, after I pick the 5th string, my thumb will be resting and it looks planted on the 4th string. That's called a rest stroke. When we do a rest stroke with our fingers, we have to straighten up our fingers. And again, we're going to pick upward directionally, not pitchwise. So our index finger, if I'm doing a rest stroke, would go from the 3rd string and rest on the 4th string. Similarly, my middle finger will pick the 2nd string and rest. And finally, my ring finger would pick the index Generally, when we do rest strokes, we only use our index and middle fingers. It's usually a technique for single note passages like this. So again, we have four concepts: planting or not planted, and then a free stroke, which is what happens after we pick the string, or a rest stroke. And you can do combinations of those things. You could have a planted free stroke, or a planted rest stroke, or an unplanted rest stroke, or an unplanted free stroke. There's four different concepts that can be combined. We have a standard finger assignment. In general, our thumb is going to cover the 4th, 5th, or 6th strings, and our index is going to cover the 3rd string only, and our middle is going to cover the 2nd string only, and our ring finger is going to cover the 1st string only. So a great little exercise would be to play the 6th string, and then the 3rd, 2nd, and 1st, 5th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, 1st. Notice I'm planting before each of those events. One thing I will point out, this is sort of subtlety of planting, is that we often, when we plant our fingers, we will simultaneously pick that bass note. So watch carefully here. I'll try and do it slowly. If my fingers are up, and I'm exaggerating to be up, we would never want to be this high from the neck. But I'm going to plant and pick all in one motion on that bass note. What we don't want to do is plant and then pick, because we don't have time. So if I'm doing a pattern like this, you'll notice it's plant, 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 plant. And as I plant, that bass note is picking with my thumb. And that's what we call standard finger assignment. The other assignment that we'll use is just alternating fingers. It's usually just your index and middle, and this is generally for single note passages. And it's almost always a rest stroke. We won't use that much, but just so you know what it is, it's called an alternating finger assignment. All right, I think that covers it for picking the strings with our right hand without a pick. I'll see you at lesson 4.